In 1945, as the smoke of Europe's war began to thin, another conflict, silent, buried, and written only in fragments, was already taking shape. Among the ruins of Berlin, entire convoys vanished without record. Research sites were sealed in concrete. Men who had once stood under the banners of empire were quietly absorbed into new allegiances. Governments denied knowledge. Witnesses were erased. The official story of victory became only half the truth, while the rest was locked behind redacted files and sealed archives. What remained was a trail of ash, rumor, and coded silence, an unfinished history still waiting to be found. Chapter 1. Operation Echo. The Ghost Files of Dresden. On the night of February 13, 1945, Allied bombers tore across the Saxon sky. Dresden, once called the Florence of the Elbe, was consumed by a storm of fire so vast that even reconnaissance aircraft reported their instruments faltering from the heat. Yet amid the chaos, deep below the Altstadt rail yard, a convoy bearing the mark Echo 12 was loaded under strict SS supervision. Witness accounts later recovered by British field officers describe 6 trucks, canvas-covered, escorted by men in plain black uniforms, not Wehrmacht, not Luftwaffe, departing south toward Pirna at precisely 22:40 hours. None of those vehicles were ever seen again. The official Allied reports from March 1945 make no mention of Echo 12. Yet a classified OSS intercept, logged 2 days later from a broken Enigma line referenced special cargo moved before impact, priority Morgensturm. That codename, Morgensturm, appeared nowhere in Allied or Axis archives after the war. It surfaced only once more, in a CIA cable from 1953, referring to possible remnants of Operation Morgensturm materials identified within Soviet intelligence custody. No further details were attached. In 1946, an American recovery detachment under Colonel Frederick H. Lytton of the 1st Technical Service Command was assigned to retrieve remaining German research material across Saxony. Among his unclassified reports was a passing note. Unusual crates discovered near Königssee Fortress, each marked with eagle crest and the initials E12. Contents removed by British prior to our arrival, but in Lytton's classified addendum, later declassified only in part under the Freedom of Information Act, he added one final line, heavily redacted except for a single fragment. Evidence suggests cargo not mechanical, biological, or informational. By 1947, the British Ministry of Defence quietly transferred all files relating to Project Echo to an internal archive under reference BX 473-1945D. The same year, an officer attached to MI6, Major Henry Cartwright, disappeared while en route to Vienna. His last known message, transmitted from Munich, read simply, "Have located Echo Trail, Soviet acquisition probable, proceeding east." His body was never found. Fragments of microfilm recovered from Cartwright's effects, labeled Deutsche Luftwaffe Peenemünde Subpfeile 1145, contained partial schematics for what appeared to be a propulsion control system unrelated to any known German aircraft. The notes, handwritten in English, read, "Echo material consistent with high-altitude remote testing. Technology not matched by any Allied development." The authenticity of these fragments was later disputed by both British and American authorities, though independent analysis at Langley in 1961 concluded the handwriting likely belonged to Cartwright himself. In 1958, the Bundesnachrichtendienst, the newly formed West German intelligence service, initiated a covert inquiry into missing wartime materials categorized as unaccounted advanced weapons research. Among the files, one entry, Echo 12, last seen Dresden sector, was marked abgeschlossen, case closed, with no explanation. 2 years later, a retired Luftwaffe engineer, Dr. Klaus Reimer, was found dead in Hamburg. Police listed the death as accidental carbon monoxide poisoning. Reimer's daughter, in a 1983 interview, claimed her father had received letters from old colleagues in East Germany warning him not to speak of the Dresden cargo. Those letters were destroyed before investigators. Arrived. Documents unearthed in 1991, after the fall of the Berlin Wall revealed Soviet counterintelligence files labeled Echo Operation Materials, classified under Directive. No, 214b. The files contained cross-references to Peenemünde, Görlitz, and an unspecified deep site extraction south of Dresden. Soviet notations in red pencil marked certain pages false lead or American interference. However, one line, translated from Russian, stood out. The original material was not technical, but documentary, strategic mapping of Western intelligence networks, 1943-1945. If true, the disappearance of Echo 12 may not have been about a weapon at all, but about information, intercepted, encrypted, and worth killing for. A 1969 US Army intelligence memo, now partially declassified, revisited the case after unidentified crates matching wartime German military shipping dimensions were uncovered in a forgotten warehouse at Tempelhof Air Base. The crates, marked with faded insignia and coded E-12B unit, were transported to Fort Detrick for inspection. The report from that inspection remains classified, but the shipping manifest, obtained through an internal leak in 1984, listed sealed metal containers, contents unknown, high containment recommended. No further documentation has been made public. Today, within the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, one object remains officially tagged under Echo classification. A steel crate, accessioned in 1946, still sealed under Cold War statute, Para 117A. Its contents are listed simply as unknown, pending reclassification. When an independent historian, Dr. Martin Ellsworth, requested access in 2004, his petition was denied. The denial letter cited potential exposure of surviving classified foreign intelligence materials. In 2012, a Freedom of Information request concerning Operation Echo was filed by a German journalist collective under the European right of access to archives. The US response acknowledged the crate's existence but stated that public release could compromise the integrity of ongoing historical review concerning bilateral post-war intelligence agreements. No such review has ever been confirmed by either government. Even now, in the archival basement beneath the National Archives Record Group 319, the repository for Intelligence and Security Command materials, a sealed file cabinet sits under digital lock, marked with 3 letters, ECH. Maintenance staff report the drawer occasionally emits a faint metallic odor. The barcode, when scanned, redirects to a file ID dated 1945, origin Dresden, Perna corridor. There are no accessible documents under that code. The final trace of Echo 12 lies not in Europe, but in a decommissioned US Army warehouse in Edgewood, Maryland. Satellite imagery taken in 2017 revealed a rusting container stenciled Echo 12, Wreck, 1946. Locals claim it was removed under armed escort the following spring. Its current location is unknown. For more than 70 years, the story of Operation Echo has hovered at the edges of official history, a classified ghost. Was it a weapons shipment spirited out of Dresden under the shadow of annihilation, or the transport of stolen Allied intelligence meant to rewrite the end of the war? No definitive proof has surfaced. But somewhere, sealed behind layers of national security and fading memory, the truth of what left Dresden that night still waits, silent, in a crate that no one dares to open. Chapter 2. The Black Vault of Königssee. In the early spring of 1945, American units advancing through southern Bavaria encountered a strange absence. Villages evacuated, roads sealed by freshly collapsed tunnels, and an eerie silence descending over the Obersalzberg region. Beneath the tranquil surface of Königssee, a glacial lake framed by sheer cliffs, rumors persisted of something buried. A final refuge for the Reich's most secret research, a facility codenamed Schwarze Kammer, the Black Vault. To Allied cartographers, the lake was a landmark. To the SS Ahnenerbe, it was the mouth of an underworld that could swallow their last secrets, whole. The first written reference to the Black Vault appeared in a field report from the US 3rd Infantry Division dated May 12, 1945. A captured SS engineer, Hans Völker, claimed under interrogation that his unit had secured the Königssee complex with explosive charges, and that no Allied hand would reach its depths. When asked what the site contained, Völker replied simply, "Archives not meant for this world." The transcript of that interrogation, Field File 682B, was transferred to the Counterintelligence Corps, CIC, and subsequently disappeared from official record. In 1946, Soviet intelligence issued a memorandum to the NKVD referencing unconfirmed reports of subterranean installations near Berchtesgaden. The directive, signed by Major General Serov, authorized reconnaissance divers to investigate. Their findings were never published. Western observers noted that Soviet interest in the area ceased abruptly after 2 months, as if the results had been classified at the highest level. The US Army, too, had dispatched a technical recovery team from the 7th Army's G2 section. Led by Captain Robert Albright, the mission was labelled Operation Deep Current. According to a surviving operations ledger, Albright's unit launched a series of dives on July 17, 1947. Their equipment logs confirm multiple submersions at depths of over 120 meters, with the final entry reading, strong current from below, artificial origin suspected. No subsequent reports followed. 3 weeks later, Albright was reassigned to administrative duty and relieved of field command. He left the army in 1948, living in seclusion until his death in 1963. Among his personal effects, discovered by his niece decades later, was a single page of notes written in pencil. "The vault is not a bunker, it breathes." Handwriting analysts confirmed its authenticity. No one could explain what he meant. In the early 1950s, the Bavarian state government sealed off sections of the lake under the guise of environmental protection. However, archived correspondence between the German Interior Ministry and the newly established Bundesgrenzschutz, Federal Border Guard, shows that access restrictions were enacted at the direct request of US occupation authorities. A classified annex to that correspondence, dated March 1951, cites unexplained luminescence and magnetic interference consistent with submerged metallic structures. The order forbade any further underwater exploration without Allied supervision. By 1956, the CIA had inherited responsibility for the Königssee files. An internal memorandum authored by Case Officer Arthur M. Grant described the area as possible repository of high-value wartime intelligence, including SS scientific documentation and experimental apparatus. The memo was marked Eyes Only and circulated among the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, JIOA, the same body overseeing Operation Paperclip. Within a year, the project was shelved. Grant retired in 1958. His death in 1962 was officially listed as suicide, though his widow later recalled that he had burned several boxes of government papers days before he died. Local fishermen in Schönau am Königssee tell stories passed down since the war's end. They speak of nights when the water glowed faintly blue, or when faint mechanical hums echoed from beneath the surface. In 1979, amateur diver Peter Hölzel claimed to have discovered a concrete structure 60 meters below the northern shore, its entrance sealed by twisted rebar and what appeared to be detonation scars. When he attempted a second dive, he was detained by police and fined for violating restricted access orders. His camera, confiscated by Bavarian authorities, was never returned. The case was quietly dismissed. Declassified US Army aerial photographs from 1945 reveal an anomaly, an unnatural depression near the southern edge of the lake, approximately 20 meters across, consistent with a controlled implosion. Modern sonar imaging performed in 1999 by an Austrian geological survey identified a hollow cavity beneath the same location, extending laterally toward the mountain wall. Officially, the formation is described as a natural limestone void, but the accompanying data shows sharply defined right angles and a flat floor, features no natural cavern would produce. A retired Bundeswehr diver, interviewed anonymously in 2008, claimed he was part of a NATO training exercise in 1964 that secretly investigated Königsee's depths. According to his account, their sonar equipment detected metallic signatures far below safe diving limits. "It was like the floor of the lake was made of steel," he said. The readings pulsed, almost like a heartbeat. When his report reached command, it was reclassified and the exercise cancelled mid-operation. In 2014, a cache of microfilm reels surfaced in an estate auction in Munich. Labelled Reichsforschungsamt, Internal Projects 1943-45, the films contained incomplete technical drawings bearing the stamp of the Ahnenerbe Institute. Among them, Project Nadia Speicher, Project Nadia Storage, with coordinates corresponding roughly to Königssee. The documents describe a subterranean archive vault, designed to preserve sensitive materials against aerial assault and occupation, marginal notes reference, containment cylinders, and external electromagnetic shielding, suggesting that the vault was meant to protect something more than paper, perhaps equipment or samples deemed too dangerous to destroy. Today, the area surrounding Königssee remains under strict preservation law, and no excavation permits have been issued for over 70 years. Yet satellite thermal imagery taken during the summer of 2020 detected a faint but persistent heat signature rising from beneath the lakebed, directly aligned with the supposed vault site. The source, according to the Bavarian State Geology Office, is an unconfirmed geothermal vent. No vent has ever been mapped in that region. The Black Vault of Königssee exists now only in whispers, an invisible scar beneath a mirror of water. Some historians argue it was nothing more than a collapsed tunnel network, used to store documents destroyed in the final days of the Reich. Others insist it housed experimental power systems or the remnants of forbidden research. But whatever it held was deliberately buried, sealed by explosives and silence alike. Beneath that still beautiful lake, somewhere between history and denial, the breath of the vault continues, waiting for the day someone dares to break its seal. Chapter 3. Red Mercury and the Shadow of Prague. In the summer of 1968, as the Soviet Union crushed the Prague Spring under the treads of its tanks, a small, unmarked suitcase disappeared somewhere between the Czechoslovak Academy of Sciences and the Austrian border. The man carrying it, known to Western intelligence only as Engineer V, had been a chemical physicist attached to the Prague Institute for Nuclear Research since 1952. His real name remains redacted, but declassified CIA records later described him as a former technical asset of unknown wartime affiliation, probable recruitment under Operation Paperclip, redirected to Czechoslovakia by Soviet custody transfer, 1946. What he carried that night, according to cables sent from Langley, was a vial of an unidentified red substance labelled RM-46. At 02:15 hours on August 22nd, the defector's vehicle, a battered Tatra 603 sedan, was found abandoned near the border village of Mikulov. The driver's side window was shattered inward. No signs of a struggle, no blood. The contents of the trunk had been removed except for a single envelope containing a folded page of laboratory notes, written in German, bearing the heading Reichswaffenamt, Obersalzberg Facility, 1944. The text mentioned stabilization of mercury isotope suspension under high neutron flux, and an illegible formula followed by the phrase Project Morgenröte. Within 24 hours, CIA Prague Station issued a flash priority directive under the codename Project Crystal. It ordered immediate retrieval of any materials related to RM-46 and authorized field assets to engage without formal diplomatic clearance. The next day, Soviet armored divisions occupied the city, and all Western intelligence presence in Prague was terminated under duress. Project Crystal officially ceased to exist 3 days later. But internal memoranda tell another story. A transmission from CIA Berlin marked September 3, 1968, refers to possible loss of containment sample and unexplained radiation anomalies detected by USF satellite KH-4B near Temelin coordinates. Those anomalies, confirmed by Department of Energy analysts decades later, showed measurable neutron bursts inconsistent with any known power plant at the time. The data was classified under Foreign Atomic Development Unverified. 2 field agents assigned to the extraction team, Walter Devers and Antonin Liska, disappeared that same month. Their personnel files were sealed until 1997, when a congressional oversight request forced limited disclosure. Both men had previously served in post-war European operations involving recovered Nazi scientific personnel. Liska, a Czech national, had ties to a wartime project under SS physicist Dr. Helmut Wirth, formerly of the Heereswaffenamt experimental division. The connection between Wirth and the formula marked RM-46 has never been formally acknowledged, though a fragment of Wirth's 1944 notebook, recovered in Görlitz, contains the line, Mercurium rot, stable under controlled fusion only. From the Soviet side, KGB archives declassified in the 1990s reveal that Moscow had been searching for the same compound since the 1950s. A report dated 1951, addressed to Lavrenti Beria, describes liquid metallic isotope of military potential, originated from German high-energy division, possibly stored in Austria. The report identifies one test subject, Engineer V, retained for analysis, status unknown. That same man would surface in Prague 17 years later, under American surveillance, attempting to defect. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, Fragments of RM-46 documentation emerged among the ruins of the Stasi headquarters in East Berlin. A single microfilm roll labeled Mercury 46 was recovered from a destroyed safe. It contained test data written in both German and Russian, measuring anomalous mass density values inconsistent with conventional mercury. One page bore a handwritten note in Russian. If combined with neutron amplifier, critical mass, WWII 0. Western analysts dismissed the document as Cold War pseudoscience. Yet those same density readings matched experimental rumors surrounding a supposed superdense isotope, later dubbed red mercury. In 1993, a declassified Ministry of Defense report from the former Czechoslovakia referenced sealed containers recovered near Temelín during facility excavation. The contents were transferred to the Institute of Nuclear Safety at Zej under military escort. Photographs taken during the transfer show technicians wearing high containment suits and lead-lined crates bearing faded German markings. RM-46, nicht öffnen. Within months, all samples were transferred to Moscow under bilateral agreement, and the Czech records were destroyed for safety reasons. By 1995, the term red mercury had entered the global black market lexicon, touted as a fissionless trigger material capable of catalyzing compact nuclear reactions. Western agencies publicly declared it a hoax, an elaborate Soviet disinformation campaign, but declassified NSA intercepts from that same period reveal the opposite concern. Substance RM-46 may have originated from wartime experimental series designated Morgenröte. Verification impossible due to destruction of Obersalzberg archives. The most disturbing lead surfaced in 2002, when Polish divers discovered a sunken train car in the Vltava River, near the ruins of an abandoned chemical plant. Among the debris lay glass ampoules sealed in resin, stamped with the same Reichswaffenamt insignia found in the 1968 notes. Radiation testing registered no abnormalities, yet the ampoules were swiftly removed by unidentified personnel, claiming to represent NATO Hazardous Materials Command. Local authorities were told to record the find as contaminated laboratory waste. The ampoules were never seen again. Today, red mercury remains a ghost, half legend, half bureaucratic nightmare. To the intelligence community, it is either a Cold War myth designed to trap arms traffickers or a classified discovery too volatile to acknowledge. To those who study the archives, the pattern is familiar. A wartime experiment buried, a scientist silenced, and a trail of erased names stretching from Obersalzberg to Prague. In a forgotten corner of the Czech National Technical Museum, an unlabeled steel canister sits behind glass. It was anonymously donated in 1991 with no provenance. A faint reddish residue clings to its interior seams. The curators dismiss it as nothing more than oxidized mercury. Yet, when exposed to ultraviolet light, the residue glows faintly, just enough to catch the eye before it fades again into darkness. Whether coincidence or the lingering trace of RM-46, no one can say. What is certain is that the substance's shadow still lingers, hovering between history and denial, just like the man who carried it into the night and never reached the border. Chapter 4. Operation Harvest. The Missing Men of Peenemünde. In the chaotic spring of 1945, as the Third Reich disintegrated and Allied forces carved through northern Germany, Peenemünde, birthplace of the V2 rocket, stood as both a prize and a problem. The site was heavily bombed but still functional. Intelligence briefings described assets of high scientific value remaining on the Baltic coast. American, British, and Soviet teams raced toward it, each under strict orders to secure German scientists before the others could. Operation Paperclip would soon absorb hundreds of those engineers. Yet among the meticulously documented transfers, a gap remains, 23 names missing from the official manifest. The Army called it an accounting error. The CIA called it irrelevant. But the internal codename given to their disappearance, Operation Harvest, suggests otherwise. The first hint appeared in a 1946 Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency memorandum marked Restricted Confidential. It referred to unresolved personnel discrepancy among Peenemünde technical staff, presumed deceased or in Soviet custody. The names were redacted, but cross-referencing their research fields revealed expertise in propulsion, guidance, and atmospheric re-entry, precisely the disciplines that would define the coming space race. According to surviving Peenemünde logs, their final recorded presence was on April 29, 1945, at Lübeck, assigned to relocation transport south via Baltic route. The transport's destination was coded Hafenpunkt Zeta, an unidentified harbour never located on any map. A US Navy decrypt dated May 3, 1945, later declassified under FOIA Case 69-1127, described intercepted German naval traffic referencing a U-boat group departing from Lübeck Bay. Special cargo and 23 civilian passengers, no radio communication, silence mandatory under threat of execution. The message bore the signature Guido Richter, possibly referring to Captain Hans Richter of the Kriegsmarine's 11th Flotilla, officially executed in Kiel days later. However, post-war Soviet naval files list Richter as recruited asset, status unknown, disappeared 1946. The same Soviet documents mention a submarine identified only as UN-719, recorded lost in the Baltic with classified scientific cargo. Its wreck has never been found. In 1951, a classified US Air Force report titled German Missile Research Recovered by USSR surfaced briefly before being withdrawn. Within it was a single paragraph referencing former Peenemünde engineers observed at Novaya Zemlya during initial post-war rocketry tests. The source was described as a defected Finnish technician who claimed to have seen Germans with southern accents, military guards, no insignia. Western analysts dismissed the testimony as unreliable, but a decade later, a Soviet defector named Colonel Nikolai Smirnov told British MI6 debriefers that Peenemünde scientists were kept in Siberian isolation compound known as Object 742 near Yakutsk under NKVD oversight. The site, Smirnov said, was self-contained, employing approximately 30 German engineers on long-range propulsion systems for atmospheric ascent. His claims were noted, then buried under classification code Horizon Black. Satellite imagery from the 1970s confirmed the existence of a restricted area matching Smirnov's description, an airstrip, hangars, and cylindrical storage silos half buried in permafrost. The CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology filed it under non-nuclear missile development, foreign. But after 1977, all imagery and reports referencing the coordinates were transferred to the Department of Defense and sealed. Internal memos warned that public disclosure could complicate existing arms limitation narratives. What became of the missing 23 remains largely conjecture. Family correspondence recovered from the estate of Dr. Werner Holtz, a known Peenemünde researcher who defected to the US, included a letter from an unnamed colleague dated 1948. "We are not in America, nor Russia. They call this place 742. The air burns white when we test. Some of us are ill." The handwriting analysis matched that of Dr. Ernst Schreiber, one of the officially deceased paperclip candidates. In 1981, seismic monitoring stations in Alaska and Japan recorded atmospheric disturbances consistent with a high-altitude explosion over central Siberia. No meteorological or military explanation was offered. That same year, an internal NASA communication, subject, possible correlation, Object 742, mentioned unverified intelligence reports suggesting post-war propulsion tests conducted at extreme altitude by unknown state actors. The report was classified as speculative and archived without follow-up. The name Harvest reappeared, decades later, in a redacted Department of Defense review of Cold War intelligence anomalies. A passage dated March 1974 referenced repatriation of materials linked to early paperclip discrepancies originating from former Soviet territories. The section was heavily censored, but one clear sentence remained. Harvest assets no longer biological. To historians familiar with post-war intelligence language, biological often referred not to life forms, but to personnel. In 1994, a group of German amateur historians discovered a sealed military container in a forest near Rostock, marked OKL Harvest, 1945. Inside were corroded notebooks, mostly unreadable, but one entry remained legible. It contained coordinates, a drawing of a long conical vehicle, and a notation. Lift test, 742, 1950. Forensic ink analysis confirmed post-war composition, suggesting the notes were written after the official end of World War II. The notebooks were confiscated by German authorities, reportedly at the request of NATO intelligence. Modern historians who attempt to investigate Operation Harvest encounter an unusual silence. U.S. Army archives in Maryland list no such codename. The CIA maintains no record. Soviet-era sources are either missing or falsified. Yet scattered references persist in old European intelligence indexes, often misfiled or mislabeled, as if someone wanted the fragments to be discoverable but meaningless. Among these fragments is a 1947 British Air Ministry cable stating, "Harvest Group never reached U.S. custody. All subsequent reports to be suppressed until formal resolution." No resolution ever came. Today, what remains of Peenemünde is a museum, a relic of an era that birthed both the space race and the nuclear nightmare. Tour guides speak proudly of the V2 engineers who helped build America's rockets, but their lists stop at 118 names. The missing 23 are not mentioned. Somewhere, perhaps buried in permafrost or lost beneath the Baltic, the men of Operation Harvest left traces of a different legacy, one too dangerous or too shameful to acknowledge. Their absence is not an accident of bureaucracy. It is the echo of a deliberate erasure carried out by the victors who inherited their work and the secrets they were never meant to share. Chapter 5. The Tokyo Directive. Files from the Forgotten War. In the shattered aftermath of 1945, as Japan surrendered and Allied occupation forces spread across its cities, a second and far quieter war began. One fought not on battlefields, but in laboratories and interrogation rooms. While Tokyo smoldered, American G2 intelligence officers scoured the country for remnants of Imperial Japan's secret military programs, chemical and biological warfare divisions operating under the shadow of the Kempeitai. Among these, none was more notorious than Unit 731, the Manchurian facility responsible for human experimentation on an industrial scale. Officially, its leadership was dismantled, its members executed or imprisoned. But buried within declassified archives lies a different story, marked under an order few historians have ever seen. Directive 1879B, issued in December 1946 under the authority of General Charles Willoughby, MacArthur's intelligence chief, the directive authorized special containment and transfer of select imperial scientific personnel deemed of significant intelligence and operational value. The order was transmitted via encrypted cable to U.S. Army Medical Command Pacific and countersigned by an unnamed liaison from Washington. Its instructions were explicit: no public record, no court proceedings, and no notification to Allied tribunals in Tokyo. In effect, Directive 1879B pardoned war criminals in exchange for their data. Recovered correspondence from 1947 between Willoughby's office and Fort Detrick's research division in Maryland confirms that the arrangement was already in motion. A memo dated February 2nd references transfer of bacteriological cultures and surviving technical staff from former Harbin facilities under codenames Firefly and Nightingale. These codenames would later surface in a 1953 Navy Bioresearch summary labeled Pacific. Forward. The report described test programs conducted on non-human primates and controlled human analogues within island installations across the Marshall and Caroline chains. Each entry concluded with the same classification note. Origin data, 731. When U.S. occupation officials prepared their case for the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal, prosecutors requested access to captured biological warfare materials. Their requests were denied for national security reasons. Testimonies implicating Japanese scientists were quietly redacted or struck from record. Dr. Shiro Ishii, commander of Unit 731, was never tried. According to an unclassified 1980 State Department memo, Ishii was debriefed in Tokyo under directive authority, after which he was released. The same memo lists his final known location as Tokyo Metropolitan Area, 1958. Deceased, unconfirmed. Japanese medical records from the post-war years show a series of new research organizations founded under Western supervision. The National Institute of Health in Tokyo, the Institute of Infectious Diseases, and multiple defense-linked laboratories on Okinawa. Many of their early directors had unverifiable employment histories between 1945 and 1949. In 1999, a researcher from Kyoto University uncovered a roster of scientists who had received US Army research grants during that same period, several of whom were later confirmed to have worked under Ishii in Harbin. Their publications cited unavailable primary data that could only have originated from wartime experimentation. By 1952, Directive 1879B expanded its reach. A classified cable from the Department of the Navy authorized medical data exchange with Japan's National Police Reserve, the precursor to the self-defense forces. Internal notes warned that disclosure of the directive would provoke political instability and irreparable damage to US-Japan relations. Parallel research facilities were established on Kwajalein Atoll and Guam under joint military oversight. Their stated mission: preventative medicine studies for tropical defense conditions. Yet incident logs from those bases include references to inoculation events and environmental field exposure exercises carried out on unregistered civilian subjects from nearby islands. In 1956, an outbreak of hemorrhagic fever struck the island of Pohnpei. Navy medical teams imposed an immediate quarantine. Survivors later reported experimental treatments and mandatory injections administered by American and Japanese personnel. Official military reports classified the event as a natural epidemic exacerbated by climate. Internal documentation tells a different story. Pathogen samples coded Type H731 were flown from Guam to Fort Detrick 3 days before the quarantine was lifted. The sample record remains sealed under the Defense Threat Reduction Agency's highest classification. A 1962 RAND Corporation study, declassified in part in 2011, summarized biomedical collaboration under Pacific Command protocols. One redacted paragraph references Directive 1879B experimental series, terminated following incident at Micronesia test site. The study's author, Dr. Richard Schlesinger, was a former Army medical officer stationed in Yokohama. He disappeared the following year while traveling to Okinawa to lecture on bioethics. His luggage was later found on a ferry dock. His research notes missing. In 1977, Japanese journalist Takashi Yamamoto obtained photocopies of what he claimed were fragments of Directive 1879B. The papers included signatures of US Army officers and the typed phrase "program continuity," ensured through Firefly personnel. Assimilation. Before his findings could be published, Yamamoto was killed in a car crash outside Nagano under circumstances the police described as mechanical failure. The documents vanished from his home, and no copies have surfaced since. His widow later received an anonymous envelope containing only a single photograph, an aerial image of Micronesia labeled Test Area C 1953. As of today, official US and Japanese government statements deny the existence of any Tokyo Directive. The term itself appears nowhere in the searchable archives of the National Diet Library or US Army historical collections. Yet declassified communication logs confirm that something by that name was destroyed under presidential authority in 1974, during the cleanup of obsolete intelligence records from the Korean War era. The destruction order cites expired classification, Directive 1879B Tokyo. What makes the Tokyo Directive so enduring is not only its secrecy, but its legacy. Many of the scientists allegedly protected under its provisions went on to shape Japan's modern medical infrastructure and its collaboration with American defense research. Their experiments, stripped of origin, seeded entire fields of epidemiology and vaccine development. The price for that progress, human lives taken in unrecorded experiments, was quietly omitted from history textbooks on both sides of the Pacific. In 2015, a cache of unmarked reels surfaced at a private estate sale in Honolulu. The films depicted men in US uniforms documenting inoculation trials on Pacific Islanders during the 1950s. A frame at the end of one reel bore a typewritten tag, Firefly Group, under Directive 1879B, Tokyo, 1953. The footage was confiscated by federal authorities within 48 hours, citing improper possession of government property. No public release followed. If the Tokyo Directive existed, its files are long buried, burned, shredded, or locked beneath layers of national security, yet its fingerprints remain visible. In the unexplained gaps of medical archives, in the unnamed research funding that flowed after 1945, and in the quiet evasions of every government inquiry that has dared to ask the wrong question, the war may have ended, but the experiments it justified never fully stopped. They simply changed their names, their institutions, and the flags flying above their laboratories. The war's end was never clean. Beneath the parades, the treaties, and the photographs of liberation, something else persisted. Sealed vaults, missing men, vanished convoys, and directives no one will ever admit writing. Every nation buried its own sins beneath new acronyms and flags. From Dresden's ghost files to the frozen silence of Peenemunde's lost engineers, from Königsee's drowned tunnels to the quiet laboratories of post-war Tokyo, fragments of that hidden world still surface, then vanish again into redacted pages and coded archives. History may have chosen its victors, but the truth, the full, unflinching truth, remains undefeated, locked away, waiting for the next crack in the seal to let the light in.